what do you think incumbents or energy companies are looking for? Like, as a startup, how should I be thinking about pitching to them and what my value proposition is?
Where do you fit relative to all the other alternatives to solve that problem? You really need them, but do they need you? There's great opportunities to work together, but it's really hard.
Welcome to Deep Tech Live by SOSV, the podcast where we explore the frontiers of deep tech and its impact on our world, with the help of top technologists, researchers, and pioneering founders shaping tomorrow. SOSV Deep Tech Live.
I'm Susan Schofer, partner at SOSV and Chief Science Officer at HAX, our hard tech program. For those who don't know, SOSV invests into early stage deep tech companies. We invest at a pre-seed stage. We're very often the first check into a company, and we do that through a few different programs that we run. This here is SOSV's New York office. HAX is our hard tech program that I'm a part of. We have our global headquarters across the river in Newark, New Jersey. We have a global team. We have offices in multiple locations around the world. We have a team of hands-on engineers that works really closely with our startups. And we really work with them to help them accelerate and de-risk their technologies. I'm thrilled today to have with me Dr. Barbara Berger. I'm excited for this conversation. Barbara is someone who has inspired me since even long before we met face-to-face or in person. She's someone I knew about at the very beginning of my own career journey into hard tech. And today we're going to have a great conversation. Back in the late 1900s, when I first started my own journey into hard tech, is when I first learned about Barbara and her work. We have a few things in common. We're both Caltech PhDs. We both share the same research advisor. Her work in graduate school addressed some of the most fundamental questions to help us understand really how polyethylene and polypropylene are made. Now, if you don't know what those are plastics that probably everyone uses multiple times a day. So she did some of the fundamental work that helped us understand really what mechanisms underlie how we make them, and then how their structures are and what different performance they can have. She then went on to have a really exciting and diverse career at Chevron, which in and of itself is an unusual path. And today we're going to be diving into some of her learnings and the insights from her career at Chevron. So welcome, Barbara. Thank you for being here.
Hey, thanks for the invitation. It's glad to be here. Yeah, let's go. I can't see any of you out there except I can see your shoes. That's about it. So I'm looking at you. I just don't know who you are or what you look like.
So your career and journey has been quite an interesting one. You're often called the godmother of energy investing. And I want to understand really how your unique background, coming out of Caltech, what initially interested you about going into industry, and sort of what path did that put you on?
Yeah, so it was about 100 years ago. So as an undergraduate, and I am here for a university trustee meeting, which is why I have merch from my undergraduate on. I was interested in, I majored in chemistry with a minor in history, and I was kind of interested in a lot of stuff about like the world and everything, and but I also liked how things got made. I was a very physical world person before I knew that was a thing, right? So I was more interested in chemistry than physics and math and so forth. I went to graduate school, and I don't know about you, Susan, but like when you get a Bachelor of Science in chemistry, like the natural route is to go to graduate school in chemistry. I didn't know I could do other things. I didn't know that I could go and get a doctorate in something else. I'm not sure I would have, but I didn't know that. And I think students now know that. I went to Caltech, and I knew I didn't want to go into academics, which is a very strange place to be when you learn that. I love teaching, but the academic research was very very challenging for me because I'm a very practical person, and I wanted to get out in the world and work for a company and make things and stuff. So industry made sense to me. I was very fortunate that in those days, I had a lot of offers. I had a lot of opportunities to choose where I was going to go to work, and I chose Chevron for a really funny reason. I think it turned out to be a really good reason, but I wasn't sure that I wanted to work in the lab my whole career. In fact, I was pretty sure I didn't. And so I asked during my job interview, do you think I could do other things like, I don't know, manage a refinery? I don't even think I knew what that really would entail. But the guy that I was talking to, he gave me some examples of people that had crossed disciplines. And for me, that just felt like such a breath of fresh air that I could do lots of different things with my ability to learn and my ability to deliver. So I started in Chevron, and 34 years and 10 months later, I graduated again and am on the next chapter.
That's awesome. I mean, you mentioned something when we spoke before about just kind of some of your learnings as you made that transition in the early days. Obviously coming out of grad school, we have a certain perspective, and you're very much, doing your own individual research as an individual contributor. So how did you find that experience then going into industry where often you're working in a team and people are from very diverse backgrounds?
Yeah. So I was never not a supervisor. So that's one thing, is that I came out of school and I was a supervisor. And the people that reported to me, a couple of things. One, they knew a lot more than me. Two, they were a lot older than me. And they would kind of look like my dad, right? And so if you can imagine, that was like a little bit of a cultural thing. Probably the smartest thing I did was to realize I could learn a lot from them and not try to be a know-it-all, which they were great. And I would say some of the best allies I had early in the game in terms of learning about industrial chemistry and then about energy were men that had daughters, right? Because they looked at me and they said, that could be my daughter, And so I learned a lot from them. And I started in the lab. And then a year into it, I don't know if I've told you about this one, but my boss took me to lunch. Okay, when your boss takes you to lunch, there's an ask. And asked me if I'd go work in a manufacturing plant in Ohio. And they asked me if I'd go for 6 months. So I bought a round trip ticket. It was a good thing. But I loved manufacturing. The pace of it was very fast. I got a chance to work with operators, process engineers, the business group. We were making chemicals there. We had to make decisions every morning at the all hands and operational. And I learned you have to make decisions based on very incomplete information, and you have to make them together, and you leave that room having made a decision. And it was really hard for me to go back in the lab after that.
Yeah. I mean, I think later we're going to have a little debate as to who is the smartest person in the room. And I know that we probably share the sentiment that we probably don't want it to be ourselves.
Yeah.
But anyway, I guess following up on that question, though, do you feel like your learnings from Caltech translated into this experience? Like, which things did you find you ended up using at that point or throughout your career?
Yeah. So I think about my graduate degree as a degree in learning, and I've said that before. I also used it probably 4 years into my career, so pretty young. There was a job posting in aviation. And again, I also loved thinking about the world and traveling. And I hadn't traveled a lot. I was one of 6 kids. So my parents basically put us in a car and drove around. And so I applied for this job, and the job, they wanted an aerospace engineer. And I'm not that. But I thought, well, I got a degree from Caltech. I could learn this. And that's basically, I got the interview and I said, I can learn this. And it was products that you're going to put in hydraulic systems in planes and stuff. And it turns out you can learn it, right? And they weren't asking me to build the plane or fly it. So we were okay there. But, I think being able to look at something and figure out, what do I need to know about this? And how do I figure out the most important things? And we were developing products for them. And so there was chemistry involved and stuff. Anyway, I got the job. I traveled everywhere because every country has an airline. Loved it. And did pretty much every job there. So that's really when I started moving to the business side of it, technically related products and stuff, but started to realize that I had a lot more skills beyond working in the lab.
So when you think about, a lot of our founders in deep tech are coming from a similar background as you and I, starting out their career as a PhD and a researcher, and then looking to kind of commercialize that technology. I'm curious what you think are the key skill sets that they need, either to develop within themselves or perhaps to hire and have around them. Like, what are things that they should be thinking about that go outside of what they learned in a research lab?
Yeah. So maybe just 3 other data points that will help you understand why I can say anything about startups. So I subsequently ran a bunch of Chevron businesses, supply, multi-country P&L, and along the way got an MBA because I realized I did not speak the language of business and I didn't speak the language of financials. And that really helped me. So those 3 things were critical pieces in my career. And then the last 9 years of my career, I got asked to run the ventures company. And I asked them, so why'd you pick me? Which is a really great question to ask people when you get a job, like why me and why not others? And one of the things that stuck with me is they said, you have an ability to say both yes and no, which means I can discern yes on this investment, no on this, and I can tell you why. And so I spent 9 years there and now have subsequently done a lot of investment board work and advise companies from very early stage, and then investment firms. And so one of the things I learned in all of that was, even if it's, developing a technology that can play a role in, for me, the energy system, you have to build a business around it. And I didn't know that coming out of Chevron or coming out of Caltech. I didn't even know how Chevron businesses were run. I got a chance to do that through my experience. But thinking about that as a founder is, there's one thing is to develop a technology and have a thesis for, how it will fit and improve the energy system. The other is, how do you build a business about it? How do you find customers that are willing to pay you more than it cost you to make? And then how do you build an organization that can do that? So I was fortunate to run a business, a mature business that had that, introduce new products and things like that, and then help startups in their journey on this.
Yeah. So shifting gears a little bit, now is a pretty exciting time in the energy sector, right? We, for the first time in a while, are seeing huge explosion in demand, right? Due to AI, due to electrification, and also reshoring of manufacturing. At the same time, things are shifting in terms of, we had the IRA incentives and that's shifting a bit. What do you think is happening and like, what has materially changed in the last few years in the energy sector?
Well, I think the load growth is probably behind some of the biggest changes. A lot of the technologies that were developed over the last 10 years assumed that low carbon electricity would be both abundant and cheap. And right now, those two are tough. And even if it is abundant, there's somebody ahead of you in line that wants it, and they have a big wallet. So there's what I would call a demand stack. And so that puts pressure on things that require electricity to, make different chemicals or materials. So so that gives you headwinds for certain technology areas and tailwinds for others. I think that's a piece of it. I think the other piece and my sector has gotten way more politicized than I would certainly like. And that didn't start in 2024, but it's such an important sector that it's always had a geopolitical dimension. But the energy security, the resilience, the aspect of balance of trade and everything like that, those give you a lot more dimensions and requirements for your energy supply. So, developing technologies in energy is a capitally intensive business. And so, we're very fortunate our government has leaned in over the years on assisting the commercialization and growth. I mean, they did it with solar, they did it with wind, they're doing it with geothermal. The IRA had a lot of that in there. But it hasn't necessarily been consistent, and there's been a tendency to want to pick technologies rather than to provide support for a range of technologies that we're going to need. And so there's a bit of whiplash on that. It's difficult because we kind of need them all. And they need help in the short run. But then they need to be economic. They need to be both affordable, because you're selling something that fits into every sector of the economy. And if it's not affordable, it leads to inflation. But it also needs to have enough margin to it that you can attract investors. And those two things make it a very difficult sector to participate in. Really interesting and exciting, but really challenging.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I guess energy is very much the economy, right? And
try doing anything without it.
Right. It's a commodity. So I think it's always hard when you're talking about innovation to use it in any kind of commoditized space, right? Especially at the early days. What do you think incumbents or energy companies are looking for? Like, as a startup, how should I be thinking about pitching to them and what my value proposition is? I mean, specifics, but also just generally how you should think about framing that.
Yeah. I give a lot of talks called the Dance of the Elephant and the Mice, because they're two very different types of companies. There's great opportunities to work together, but it's really hard. And so first and foremost, the incumbents, most of their resources, most of their people, most of their money is spent running today's business. Some of them have enough of a balance sheet that they can invest into the future. But it's, very much aligned with their strategy. So, in their current business, there's a whole host of things that can be improved. And so figuring out the prioritization of those things that can be improved, a problem that they really want to solve, because there's lots of things that they just put up with, a non-optimized system. So one is, where are their choke points or where are their headaches in their current business, and how could you help? And then the second is, where are there opportunities or adjacencies to their current businesses that they're interested in exploring that you might be a part of? So it first starts with, it's got to have a strategic alignment. They're not, they're very targeted towards that thing. And then the question is, where do you fit relative to all the other alternatives to solve that problem? And for some things, it's a really crowded field, and the problem could be solved in a lot of different ways. And some of it could be solved in one specific way, and you have the solution. So I think, first of all, getting alignment on that. In other words, you really need them, but do they need you? And if they need you, then it's going to could lead to a very collaborative relationship. And then, I think you and I have talked a lot, Susan, is how do you actually engage them and make those steps towards adoption of your technology. And by the way, if they really need you, probably you can't produce enough to satisfy their needs right now. So how do they work with you so you can scale while they scale their demand for you?
Yeah. I mean, I think that brings us to this question of like, what should startups be looking for? Obviously, if you're an incumbent, if you're a large company, hopefully, if you want to do something innovative, you have a system or a process for this. Like, what are the signals that say they're ready for it or they're experienced in doing it? What are red flags that they should be aware of? Like, what advice do you have for founders and early stage companies?
Yeah. So first of all, understand how they're set up to engage with startups, and most of them have some system for that. Okay, and startups run the gamut from software to hardware to process tech to existing businesses and new businesses. But find that out. Most of them also have R&D. And so there are things that they will develop internally because they want to have a proprietary advantage and so forth. I would say the most sophisticated ones know what fits in that bucket and what doesn't. And then, ask them, how have you introduced startup technologies before? If they've never done it, it might not be the first company you want to work with. You might not have any choice, but companies that have systematically evaluated what you have and then figured out what the game plan is in their company. Most startups want to have a pilot, and I know when I think about this, I'm like, okay, the pilot's going to be a negative MPV usually, right? We're going to try this thing. We're going to put a lot of resources around it. We're going to make sure we're going to validate it, make sure it works. But the real opportunity for me is if it works, I can deploy it across my enterprise. So I've got to have enough opportunities to deploy it. I look and I run my business case and I say, actually, if this thing works and they can meet my demand, we make more money, we have higher uptime. You've helped me with my safety if it's something where I can take people out of the equation. The company will internally say, why does this thing matter? What will it help me do? And wide variety of those things. And then my pathway to scale, usually, step one is, does this thing address the problems I have?
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to ask a follow-up question because I work with our startups a lot on just sort of how do they establish this sort of product market fit. And oftentimes it's in parallel with them developing technology, right? So it's not fully solved, but they're still trying to demonstrate some traction and really show that there is a there. I mean, oftentimes we'll have them try to chart that path, right? Like, here are the kind of phases we're envisioning. Here are the outcomes we're shooting for. Here's what we think that you're going to do as the kind of incumbent partner. I think it's a good way to get buy-in because probably 90% of the time as the startup, you get it partially wrong. But at least if you put something in front of them, you can get a reaction and kind of get people's feedback. Like, do you think that's a good approach? Like, I think it helps the startup sort of map out what it looks like. But certainly there's dialogue then that it forces to happen.
So it always depends, right? But it also, are you ready for your thing, whatever it is, to be tried out in the field or under operating conditions, or is it something I need to try in my lab, right? And I think getting over your skis and saying it's ready to be tried in the field, if I would be looking at are you really ready? And as an operator, I want to validate and I want to de-risk. I also want to spend as little money as I need to upfront to answer those questions. And so if I can do some things in the lab to de-risk parts of it, I'll do that. Now, if you're still iterating, I I'm going to want to try to figure out how to do the pilot so that I understand that you're going to take data back from this and improve it. I think it's an iteration on that. The other thing that I would say is I want to de-risk one piece of it. So say you have a particular technology and it fits within a big system. I might not want to do all the other system stuff because that stuff doesn't have the risk. So I want to just test that one thing. And so your objectives and my objectives might be slightly different. We need to have a dialogue on that one because, again, why would I spend a lot of money if what my upfront is, if my objective is, I just want to make sure that piece is de-risked and it works. And so I don't want it. It depends on the technology. I don't want to spend a lot on the balance of system if I don't need to, if that part's commercial and it doesn't matter. And those can be things like product separation at the end and stuff like that. You're going to want that ultimately to show that you can do end to end, but early on, that's not what you would work on.
Yeah. So sort of in the role of industrial Sherpa, right, where you're at the incumbent really trying to help bring this new technology along, like who are you engaging with? What does that look like? How do you play that interface role?
Okay, so I ran the ventures company at Chevron. I was really fortunate that I had 3 presidents before me, and I had a really phenomenal team. I've helped a lot of other corporations think about how to set this up, and if you work in those groups, I think it's one of the best jobs in a corporation. It's also really hard because you need to know the outside world and you need to know the inside world. Because at the end of the day, your North Star is the mothership. And you're kind of trying to change them without really they knowing that that's what you're trying to do. And so you need to understand their operations. You also need to know the people. Because when you're introducing stuff, some of it's technical and we're all comfortable with that, but some of it is just getting somebody who believes in it, is probably willing to do a little extra work, is willing to take a chance because no one ever gets fired for just using the same stuff that they've always used. And so there's a bit of psychology on finding those people that are very well connected within their own organization. And then they understand that you do not have unlimited resources. And I think this is one of the things that people that are not great Sherpas is they can suggest all kinds of things to you and you have to stay focused and you do not have all those resources and maybe you don't know about management of change or of all the safety processes and stuff. So they also need to make it a little easy for you. They have, they want to work with you because they see what you have could make their company better, right? There's self-interest in this. So they've got to kind of understand a bit of who you are and a bit of their own company. And the good thing is, if I think across the industry and whether I think industrials or energy or chemicals, there's a bunch of those kind of people and they love doing it. And so finding those people and working with them, I think leads to some really good success.
Yeah. Have you seen cases then where the science was great, right? The technology seemed to be doing its thing, but at the same time, somehow the system integration strategy didn't work out. Like, what do you think has gone wrong? Like, do you have examples you could share on that?
So good example, I mentioned a lot of technologies were developed assuming that energy was low carbon and was abundant and cheap. So your science can work and the price you have to pay for the product, it's somebody once said hydrogen is going to play an important role. And hydrogen, there's 10 million tons of hydrogen produced and used in the U.S. currently, right? And they said it's either going to be like the fine champagne at your daughter's wedding or the table wine you drink every night. And it all depends on economics, right? Because if it's really expensive, you're only going to serve it at your daughter's wedding. And if it's really cheap, I'm going to have it every night for dinner. And so economics, I think, is important. The other thing that happens is real operating conditions Sometimes stuff works in the lab or it works with pure raw materials or feed coming in. And when it gets out there, there's heterogeneity, there's all kinds of impurities, there's massive changes to the operating conditions. We're seeing that in power now because the load is not stable, it fluctuates, and that can be really hard on your technology. So those things can mess it up. And then the other thing, when Susan, when you brought that up, I thought there was a lot of carbon capture companies, and I'm a big believer that we're gonna stand up CCS at some point here. But just having the capture technology, if there's not a pipeline and there's not something to do with the CO2, you could be ready, but the rest of the value chain is not. And so that's what has made so much of this really hard, is whether I think about hydrogen or I think about CCS or I think about these various things, it's not just your part of the value chain, it's the whole value chain that needs to work in order for you to grow as a company.
Right. You're basically speaking about, first of all, demand, right? Of course, economics. And then third is like, does the rest of the infrastructure in that supply chain and value chain really exist? And if that isn't there and you have a great innovation, you still could fail, even if those things, even if your part actually works.
Yeah. I think the one piece, and I'd add, is and why I've thought energy is just fascinating area to work in, is that it's global. You try doing anything without it, but also it looks different depending on where you are in the world. And a guy earlier this week gave me this example. And it was about hydrogen, right? And hydrogen is really stalled in the US. Partly, I mean, gray hydrogen is what is used for fertilizer, petrochemicals, or all these things. But the price of green hydrogen sort of is out of the range of where you're really going to generate a lot of demand. And again, the electricity is being used for other things. Go to Europe, and gray hydrogen, hopefully that's not an unfamiliar term, but it's essentially made in a refinery, and it starts with methane. It's steam methane reforming, produces a lot of CO2, and then hydrogen is used. It's a utility player inside the refinery to make all kinds of stuff. Well, I mentioned that it starts with methane or natural gas. Well, Europe's price for natural gas, because it comes from the U.S. or the Middle East in a ship after it's been liquefied and stuck in a ship. The price point for that methane is so much higher that actually green hydrogen can pencil for those refiners. So you see a totally different thing on that side of the Atlantic from here. So I think we have to be careful to say economics, it depends. It depends on where you are and what you're competing against. And that example says, wow, if I had green hydrogen technology, I wouldn't try to be peddling it in the US right now because we are basic in the competitive technology. But I'd go to Europe where they're importing stuff.
Right. So really the importance of just doing your customer discovery, really understanding the market and going out there and talking to people and understanding at what point you can win, and even finding these like niche or different applications or different opportunities. One challenge to getting to adoption within energy and big industry is just that critical industrial infrastructure really cannot fail. So obviously we're not going to just shut down our grid for a few days while we do a pilot test or while we stand up some new innovation that might work. How do you navigate through that as you're piloting, and really how do you make sure that you're getting the right outcomes at the stages of testing so that when you're ready to go into adoption, there's actually a chance of success?
I think it's one of the hardest things, right? Is introducing something that's never been used before at scale. The smart players will find ways to introduce it to, I'm going to say in a slipstream in part. And let's say it works, but I'm going to go from something very large scale with General Electric or Siemens or something, and then all of a sudden I'm going to go to you. And the risk is, one, you we don't know how this thing's going to operate. We don't know whether it's going to have reliability issues. We don't know if it does have some reliability issues that need service. Can you service it? So all those things, it's like showtime on Broadway when the last play you did was in high school, right? And so, so what would you do? Well, you do a slipstream and you build up and you build confidence and an understanding of the technology. It's because it's not just how does it operate, but where does it fail? Because it will fail, right? Under what conditions does it fail? How do you replace the failed parts or defective parts? How do you service this? And you got to think through all of that stuff, right? And a lot of the investors in this area came in and they had a kind of a Silicon Valley, break it quickly kind of mentality. And in the physical world, and particularly around infrastructure, you just have to take a different approach to that. And I just remind everybody, like United Airlines doesn't try out a new plane and say, you want to get aboard this. They do a lot of careful introduction before you ever get in it. And hopefully that the energy system is similar thing. Space would be another one, very similar to it.
Yep. I mean, on that note, do you see a difference between what happened in Clean Tech 1.0 and the learnings that we had from that translated into perhaps some better outcomes in Clean Tech 2.0? Now maybe we're a little bit at a different point in that. But anyway, what learnings do you think that investors had? Like, I have some thoughts, but I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I think between 1.0 and 2.0, and I'm pretty sure there'll be a 3.0. So 1.0, the incumbents weren't part of it. And so the idea of going to people and I would say this to founders is as you're thinking about scaling your technology and turning it into a business, hire some people that have been in those businesses, that know how to run it, know how to construct it, all that kind of stuff. And though they weren't present the first time. So that's what I would say is one thing. This stuff is hard. And I think the time to scale, the amount of money it costs, and getting customer traction, all of those are just harder and longer. And so they didn't really fit the VC model the way 1.0 worked. I think 2.0, there was a lot of progress made. I think there was tailwinds for some things, and I think we got a little bit of irrational valuations in some technologies. I think the biggest thing we still have to connect with is making sure that there's demand for your product or your technology and demand at the right price point. And that's worked for some stuff. And certainly in the power area, power value chain, it's time will tell on some of the molecules.
Yep. I think all that makes sense. I mean, one thing I've observed, and I'm curious if you've noticed this, but I do think in Clean Tech 1.0, perhaps it was investors jumping into a space that they didn't necessarily understand because deep tech wasn't really the main thing, or hard tech. And in 2.0, I think there's been a lot of recognition of, we actually need, like you're saying, the incumbents at the table, maybe some more technical diligence. Like, it seems to me in 1.0, there was not a lot of responsibility towards flagging these huge technical risks. And like, yes, this technology is cool, but can it really scale? I don't know that was paid attention to as much.
Yeah, there was a little bit of, disruption. We're going to replace this energy system with this energy system. And the reality is, it's a lot harder than that. I feel like 2.0, more of the right people were in the room. I think we still need to work on continuing that. I think when I looked at a lot of the companies, they had both, really smart founders out of, the leading tech universities, really amazing technologies and stuff. But they also hired people in operations and in commercial. A lot of founders were very technically strong, but they didn't really know a lot about business development or the commercial side. This time around, I think they're starting to hire some people that's what they've done. And you see a lot of the veterans from whether it's SLB, Baker, Honeywell, their next chapter in their careers are to be working with some of these companies. I think it's wonderful. I think, it's intergenerational diversity. It's different diversity across from where your background was. And I think it'll be a stronger ecosystem going forward.
Another topic that I know you've been digging into and I think is super critical, something that I know we've done a lot of work on at Hacks, and a tough space is just waste, right? We have a lot of it. It'd be great to do something with it. But what have you been learning in the waste space?
Yeah, it's an interesting area, and Susan knows I read a lot. I'm going to make a pitch for a book called Waste Wars, which is about the movement of waste between nations, and kind of every chapter is a different waste, and it doesn't cover what I think is one of the ultimate wastes that we have to deal with, which is CO2 or other gases that are emitted from processes, but I think some waste there's an opportunity for circularity, and I'm still looking for those metals companies, because I guess the concentration of metals in e-waste or electronics waste is higher than the concentration in ore. So it just makes me feel like if I can take all the OpEx that miners do, I have that to play with in e-waste. So that one, it feels like there should be some real solutions there. And given that we generate a lot of e-waste in this country because we use a lot of electronics, it just feels like there's a business opportunity there. Plastics, I am less optimistic about. I think there's a lot of different solutions that are being addressed. Personally, I've become much more aware of how much plastic I use, and maybe that's got to be part of the solution. Is the convenience that we've all known comes at a cost. But I think I'm also on the board of a waste company that's private equity backed. So there's business opportunities in waste, and the operators want somebody who responsibly takes care of stuff, but they don't want to think too much about it. So if you have that kind of thing, there are good opportunities. I think there needs to be good regulation around it. You need to create a level playing field, because you kind of need to reinforce the operators that do follow the rules and want a responsible supplier. They're usually not the cheapest.
Right. Okay. Well, I know that you have things that you do outside of your professional career and your love for chemistry, as well as, the energy sector. So I know that you're a runner, as am I. And I'm just curious how you see that hobby and some of the things you do outside of your professional life impacting you as a person, impacting your career.
So, I'm a lifelong athlete. I'm a lot slower than I used to be.
Same.
Yeah, but I'm still out there. I thought about this. An athlete, and I'm a absolutely terrible piano player. I think I'm terrible, but both of them are very mental. I mean, yes, they're physical, but they really work this thing, and they work it in a different way than the business I do. I find I can do them for some period of time, and then this thing gets tired. They're also, particularly with running or hiking or all those things, there's a team aspect to them. You may not think that with running, but I can tell you, if I run behind you, and you keep it at a good pace, you will make me run faster than I could run by myself. If you run too fast, I just let you go. And so they've been continuous throughout my life. I don't know. I find they're a necessary ingredient in every day. I can't imagine just sitting on this thing all my waking hours.
Yep. I mean, in addition to that, you're involved on the board of the Houston Symphony. You have a very active book club. I mean, we just spoke moments ago about just the importance of kind of immersing yourself in other activities and what that does for your mind, and kind of helps keep you focused, helps challenge you in different ways.
Yeah. I mean, a couple of things. First of all, my star is already up there. So, I feel like I graduated from corporate life 4 years ago, and I built this portfolio, and I'm very fortunate. I sit on boards. I advise investment firms. I'm able to advise a bunch of companies, and then I'm also able to do a bunch of informal stuff. I don't know how long this lasts, but it's really great. And so, I think one piece of this is, I want to keep on learning, right? Like I got a degree in learning a long time ago from Caltech, but I also want to keep learning. I think energy continues to give me lots of opportunities to learn, but you can learn outside of that as well. I'll just give you one anecdote. Amazon lets you take public tours of their fulfillment centers. So I take a lot of field trips because as a kid, I love field trips, and I still do. So I went on I went to the fulfillment center last month. And just a couple of things about it. First of all, the fulfillment center is 30 football fields big. Okay. And I signed up for the public tour. A guy told me that you could do this, so I did. And there were 2 other adults in a second grade class. And it from when you push, if you're a Prime person, when you push order to when it gets on a truck is 20 minutes. And they have instantaneous inventory of everything. And it's not because stuff is put nicely in racks with all the books here and the toiletries here and stuff. It's all digital. So they know whether they have what I've ordered there. So they take us around and they show us what happens in this 20 minutes, and they show us all the robots, and then they show us what the people's tasks are, and you can see that that's going to be a robot in 12 months, right? Like, they've created all the tasks to roboticize them. And so a couple of things that I learned. One was the kids asked really good questions. So go on a field trip with some 8-year-olds. They asked really good questions. The second is I started thinking, so where else? I mean, Amazon has thought all this through, but where else, like in the energy system and in the physical systems, where else could you use all the things that they're talking about? Now, they've masterminded this, but I was thinking about waste. Well, if you could you get the economics right if you could just take the labor out of it, which is essentially what they're doing. They're doing it over time. And the last thing I'll tell you is the last conveyor belt that has kind of like the little things on pinball machines that there's a sensor and they push down different chutes depending on the zip codes. So it's getting to the truck that's coming to my home within 2 hours of when I ordered it. That conveyor belt can go up to 15 miles an hour. So these packages are just whizzing down. Anyway, that was a long story, but it's a kind of thing that, so that's just example of, I was kind of curious about it. And then it led to a lot of other interesting things, including a chance to spend 90 minutes with some kids. But I'm fortunate that, I get a chance to work on a bunch of different things. I have a real passion around making sure that there's access to education, whether it's, kids out in the Masai Mara or whether it's first generation students coming to universities in the US, but also founders that are trying to figure out how to take a technology and build a business around it, or just people trying to start their careers. And those of you who've further along in your careers, remember what it was like. And, a lot of times just sharing your story with them or listening to them can be very valuable. So I try to spend a lot of time doing different things and just seeing where I can help.
Yep. Sounds like a lot of fun. So finally, wrapping up here, I guess, what's a piece of advice or a few that you would give to either young people or even those in mid-career, like what do they need to have or what do they need to think about as they pursue their path?
So first of all, figure out how you learn and what you love to do, because if you're going to do it for long periods of time, you kind of need to have some passion around it. Graduate school forced us to specialize. I didn't know that at the time that that's what they were doing. The world is cross-functional. The world is broad. And so if what you do at work is very narrow, find ways to increase your knowledge of what's going on in different ways. Read, participate in conversations. And if you work for a company, and I know I worked for a big company, I used to tell my employees, don't get all your information from the company. Go out, read stuff from the industry and make your own decisions on that stuff. Go out and see the world is, my example of the European refineries. Things look different depending on where you are in the world. And so, do whatever you can to get on a plane and go see things.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all the insights you shared. And we'll look forward to continuing this dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
SOSV Deep Tech Live.